Good evening all, and welcome to my weekly Node-RED development live stream, an hour and a bit of some core Node-RED development work. Welcome back. If you're a regular viewer, I can see in the chat we've got Softy2k, Rebelor. Welcome first time chat from Halley77 and old Bobby Tables. Good to have you with us. Mauricio, Grants, Pi, the gang's all here, and I'm sure others are here. So what are we up to? So what are we up to? I've literally spent the last 2 or 3 minutes just trying to figure that out. We are, if you can see the caption down, there, wiring keyboard events. So this is a new feature that, or a feature request that came in a little while ago, and it's one of those areas I knew we had a gap in the editor where you've got keyboard shortcuts for lots of things you can do in the editor, but one of the things there is no keyboard shortcut for is creating a wire between nodes. That's something you can only do by dragging the mouse. So there have been some feature requests around wouldn't it be nice if you could just select two nodes and your mouse in one hand, left hand rests on the keyboard, select a couple nodes and then just hit a keyboard shortcut to wire them. Just make life a bit more convenient. So that's what we're going to have a look at tonight. It's a new feature, so this will go into the 2.2 release in January, assuming it gets anywhere. I mean, it will get somewhere. We'll see how far it gets tonight. So that's the plan. So do get stuck in and do follow along at home. I'm just realising, just tidy a couple bits up before I show my screen as ever. There we go. That's all good. Nothing there I don't mind you seeing. So let's share my screen. And there's the chat. And let's crack straight on. So what are we up to? So let's have a look. We've got Node-RED running. As this is a new feature, or we haven't got Node-RED running, in fact. As this is a new feature, we're working straight in the dev branch. We're going to create a new branch. Wiring shortcut. There we are, wiring shortcut, and then we're just going to run grunt dev, which, if this is your first time watching, that's grunt is the task runner we use in the Node-RED project. Dev is the task that will build the code, do all the build tasks, start Node-RED running, and watch for changes, and automatically either rebuild or restart Node-RED as needed. So there, Node-RED is running. We should be able to, if I have focused in the right window, fire up. Here we are. Oh, you know what? Because it catches me every time. Just gonna get rid of the markdown, which always has my big profile picture throwing back at me. Sharon, good to see in the chat. Good evening. Is there a shortcut to opening the quick node picker? So no, there's no keyboard shortcut for that either. One of the reasons is there are some actions that are quite dependent on the cursor position. So the quick add dialog, which is command or control click on the workspace to bring up this picker, that is only tied to control click because it needs to know where to open. And if it was purely the keyboard shortcut, I'm not sure. There's not an obvious and intuitive way to decide where to display that picker. So, I don't know. I'm sure we could come up with some. I mean, keyboard accessibility is important, but I don't have an instinctive sense of the best way of doing that yet. But let's just focus on the task at hand. So what we want to do is make it easier, essentially, to do that, to drag a wire or to connect two nodes. Now, there's going to be a ton of edge cases. So I think part of this is just making sure we do the right thing when we have some edge cases. So perhaps what I'm going to start with is I'm just going to create a workspace that is primed with some examples. So as we develop, I can just sort of keep coming back to this state and these nodes to check what's going on and check, is it doing the right thing? So on the whole, I think these are going to be, let's grab that one. I think this is all going to be fairly intuitive, but this is one of the cases that I think is going to need a bit more thought. Okay, so that's a few different edge cases, which ought to be almost self-explanatory. You know, the most simple case where we're going to have selected two nodes and there's only one output, one input. Well, in fact, this is another one to worry about. You know what, I'm just going to go find my linter. Function node, no unnamed functions. Turn off that lint rule. Just get rid of those lint errors. Just don't want to distract us. So, yeah, a few scenarios we can keep referring back to see if we're getting close to something that makes sense. Let's go into the code and make a start. So, because we're doing editor stuff, we go in the Node-RED source tree, packages, at node modules, at Node-RED, editor client, source.js. And then in here we go under UI and I think view tools is probably going to be the right home for this stuff. So this is where we already have a whole bunch of actions, many of which have been implemented on this live stream in episodes gone by. So let's just start with registering an action. Red.actions.add. It's a core, and we are going to start by calling it just connect nodes, add wire between nodes. Kind of want it to be fairly descriptive to give ourselves room to add other wiring related actions. So, and we'll just create get that to call a function called add wire between nodes, which obviously doesn't exist yet, but we're about to go and add that. So that's going to register the action under that name. Then up here we will actually define that function. And just to show you that working, we'll console.log when that gets invoked. So having saved that file, because I'm running the grunt dev task, you can see it has automatically rebuilt. See, viewtools.js changed, it's automatically rebuilt the source. So I can just come in and reload. And that's why I wanted to create those flows and deploy it, so I don't have to recreate them every time. So if I bring up the command palette, which is this guy, and you can see add wire between nodes. exists, and if I click it, we get console.log OVA down there, which means we've got the basics of a new action. And I'm sure if you've been watching previous live streams, you've seen me create actions lots of times. Actions are really the at the heart of creating the Node-RED user interface for so many things, because it's the actions that you can bind to keyboard shortcuts. So anything you want to have a keyboard shortcut to do has to be defined as an action. Right. So now let's just have a little think about what's the actual logic we want. What's the actual logic we want to have going on here? Because, yep, you're right, Steve. Add wires between selected nodes is probably a bit more consistent with the other ones. I'll go back and tweak that in a minute. Forgive me just whilst I go and pull up my there we go. There we are. Figured out where to how to do the chat moderation, so I can kick people out when they spam us. Anyway, of course, it is a nice problem to have, and that we get spammed. And indeed, if there were more of you and more spam, then I'd actually recruit some of you regular viewers to help moderate the chat. But there we are. That's for another time. So yeah. Add wires between selected nodes. Yeah. Let's just get that right from the off. Right, add wire between selected nodes. So what do we do? Well, I'm just scrolling up because we've got so many examples of what we do. First thing we need to do is get hold of what is selected. So we go to red.view.selection, it returns an object, and that object, if there are nodes selected, will have a nodes property, which is an array of the nodes that have been selected. What we want to do is think about, okay, all these different scenarios. What are we going to do? Well, I think to begin with, we're going to say you have to have exactly 2 nodes selected. And this is to begin with. It'll be, let's get the basics working when you have 2 nodes selected. Then I think there are some interesting scenarios, for example here, where you have multiple things selected. And wouldn't it be nice if the code is smart enough to connect each output of this function to the input, to a different input over here? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So we're going to start with okay, let's just deal with, okay, we have exactly 2 nodes. Then what we want to do is we need to check how many inputs and outputs each node has got. We also need to care about what order we're going to wire them up. And that's why I added this test case down here, these 2 function nodes, because, well, in theory, it should be pretty clear there that we've got well, if you compare it to this case up here, where we only have 1 output and 1 input, there's no doubt what should get wired. Then down here, we've got both nodes have inputs and outputs. How do you know which should wire to which? Now, again, this is something which might have to iterate a bit to decide what the right way round to wire them is. for now, I'm going to do it in the order they're selected. So you'd select the source node first and then select the destination node, which I think it'll be interesting to see what that means in terms of if you were to do this lasso selection, what order those nodes end up in the selection. In fact, to make my life a little easier, I'm going to call this one node. Yeah, I'm going to call that one node A and node B. In fact, I could do like a change node and a switch node. They don't have to be function nodes, but the point being, we've got nodes with multiple inputs and outputs. But let's just start with, okay, so we've got nodes, we've got exactly 2 of them. Then what we want to do is say, well, let's say node A equals selection.nodes and node B. So those are the 2 nodes. And again, we're going to assume an ordering here of we want to add a wire from node A to node B. What we need to do is, well, let's just console log those 2 nodes. Partly, I just want to remind myself what, well, for reasons. So select those 2 nodes, do red.actions.invoke. So this is the other way of doing it. Yes, I could set a default keyboard shortcut. I could do the command palette thing, or I can just invoke the code and there. So it's console.log to the 2 nodes. If we have a look at the inject node, you can see it's got inputs 0, outputs 1, which is what you would expect. And if we look at the debug node, you can see it's got inputs 1, outputs 0. So this is good. We can actually use the inputs and outputs property of the nodes themselves. So we want to say if node A dot outputs is greater than 0. Okay, node B dot inputs is greater than 0. Oop. Sorry, just jump around a bit. Right. So so it has outputs. Node A has outputs. Node B has inputs. We're going to we want to add a wire between them. So how do we add a wire? Well, there's a function for that, but I just need to remind myself how much utility that function provides us. So, oops. Add link. So add link, it's funny, in the internals of the code, there's some of the naming really does hark back to that very first week I started working on Node-RED, where wires weren't wires, they were links. So all the source code still talks about links, including on externals such as event names. So that's not changing. But what's important to realize with this add link function, so it takes a link object, which we'll come to in a sec, but it just adds it to the links list. It just does that. This doesn't do any verification that that link doesn't already exist, which arguably it could do, but what we want to do is we also have this function called filter links, where you pass in a filter object and it will return an array of all the links that match that filter. So what we want to do is we want to have a look. Can I just use the node objects? Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's source and target, isn't it? Yeah. So first things first, we have a look for any existing links between node A, node B. And so if existing links.length is 0, then, except, well, no, sorry, I was about to deal with edge cases. Not worrying about edge cases at the moment. We'll come back to edge cases in a sec. So, what we're going to do is we are going to so there are no existing links between those two. We're going to create a new link, source node A, target node B, but we also need to add in, this is what I'm just trying to remember, ID, yeah, source port, source port, and we're going to say it's from port 0. So we're only going to deal with, in fact, yeah, I'm going to deal with the edge case now. So if the node has multiple outputs, all we're caring about is wires coming out of port 0, the first port. Red.nodes.add link, new link. Oh, I'm so rusty on this stuff. I am incredibly rusty. Let's just go and look at add link. Yeah, we're going to have to do history events in a minute so we can do undo. But this is what I'm looking for. Red.nodes.dirty, which tells us there's something changed, and then, yeah, redraw. It is red.view.redraw, isn't it? Yeah, redraw. Right. So that's pretty simple. Reload, select those two nodes, and then invoke the function, and it's not done it. Okay, it has, but notice it didn't appear until I moved the nodes. That's curious. Do I need to force a resync by passing in true to redraw? Yeah, that's what I needed to do. So, okay, so that's worked there. What I'm going to just yes, Steve, that's the right set of function calls, but we're in the wrong file to call those. And in fact, that's the sequence pretty much that by passing true into here, into the redraw call, does the work. Okay, so now select those two nodes, invoke the function, that works. So that worked with the lasso select with these two nodes vertically parallel, it was inject node then debug node. What I'm curious about, oh, and of course I can't undo it. We haven't done undo history yet. We should do that in a sec. If the debug node is slightly higher and we run that action, oh, it still works. Ah, right. If I added another debug and then select, oh, yeah, then select those two nodes. Now, if I run it, it doesn't work because the debug node comes out first, then the inject node, because in the order the nodes were added, it's not about physical position. It's the order the nodes were added to the workspace. So, yeah. So doing the lasso select, the order is based on the order the nodes were added to the workspace, nothing to do with their physical position. You're right, Sharon, you can, if you select one node, then control-click the other node to add it to the selection. That will work fine. That will keep them in the right order, which, is reasonable enough for now. I think we could get smart, and if there are two nodes, we could sort them by their X position. Of course, you will then get some users who have nodes, flows that wrap back round, and they explicitly want, even though their X positions are in a backward order, they want that to happen. So, yeah. I think it's entirely consistent and explainable to say it's the order you select, and that's where you can use control to set a selection order quite carefully. Okay, let's do undo history before we let's do undo history. So let's just find another call to add link, because we can just copy history event. Oh, that's not what we want. What we want, oh, that's the splice stuff. History event. No. History event links. History event, edit, no. Come on, there must be a history event for... I know there's a history event. I just can't remember what it's called. So, the history event we are looking for is... Oh, sorry. Right. Here we are. Add. Yeah. And it expects a property called links, which are the wires that have been added. So, yeah, groups are another edge case we will forget about for the time being. Yeah, red.history push. We want, we always do the history event before we set the workspace to dirty. We set the type to add, links to this new link, and it has to be an array, but that's okay. we want to set dirty to red.nodes.dirty. So is the workspace currently dirty? Is that all we need? I think so. So let's just see what that does. So I select those two nodes, I invoke it, that's great, that's worked. I Control Z and it disappears, and the deploy button changed back to disabled. So the dirty state is reverting properly and the link is being undone. And if I've got lots of things selected, invoke it, nothing happens, quite rightly, because so that that's job done for the most simple case where you just want to connect two nodes. So with multiple outputs, if I select this function node and a debug node and invoke it, the wire gets added to the first output. And yes, you can use shift, click, drag to move it and to detach and put it somewhere else. But the point being, it works for multiple outputs, and it will always use the first output. And down here, if I select node B, then node A, and invoke it, well, yes, it does exactly what it should. It wires the output of node B to the input of node A. Right. Control Z just goes back through and replays all that history. Awesome. Deploy is enabled, Noxy Boy says. Well, it should be. It's not enabled at the moment. If I invoke the task, deploy gets enabled. If I Control Z, because it was disabled before I added the link, then it goes disabled. Obviously, if I were to invoke this more than once, so invoke it across those, it enables the button, invoke it across those, it's still enabled. If I Control Z, the wire disappears, but the button is still enabled because there's still this change. And if I Control Z again, that wire's removed, and that's now undone it back to the clean state, so the button is disabled. So to my eye, that is all working. So we could leave it there. That's job done. But let's just have now a little play with some of these edge cases and just explore, is there something to just the multi-output function node, it stayed enabled. I think it stayed enabled because I'd made another change, so I wasn't starting from a blank slate. So yeah, who was it who talked about groups? Someone, there you go, old Bobby Tables, right. So yeah. So if you're trying to connect into a node inside a group, you can't actually get into the group, because once you've got control selected, it toggles the group. You can't get it in, you can't activate the group, which you do with a double click. And yeah. So in fact, there is no way to take advantage of this when you're trying to wire into a group. I'm not going to try and solve that now. I think some of the group interactions aren't always as intuitive as they could be, but let's just stick with what we've got. Certainly should be true if the two nodes you're trying to wire are in the group. Then you can do the control click of both the nodes in the group and then invoke it, and it will work. So, that worked. But just trying to take advantage of this wiring into a group wouldn't be possible, because you can't have a node, you can't select nodes both inside outside and inside a group at the same time. We just can't do that. But you know, you can't do that today. So we're not making that scenario any better, but hopefully we'll make it better for other scenarios. So something else to think about is these cases now. Let's say you have 3 nodes selected. Right. What I'm interested in is, in fact, why don't I put them to groups? Just to help highlight them as different scenarios. So I'm not trying to go between these groups, I just want to have them as examples. Right. So in both these 2 groups, I've got 3 nodes. The question is, can we do something smart with this action for when you've got 3 things selected? Now, we don't have to go here. Like I said, what I've just implemented, we could merge, pull request now and say good night. Which is good. That's successful. That is a new feature. But I'm going to spend a bit more time just thinking around, okay, can we go a step further with the logic here? So here in these 2 groups, we've got 3 nodes. There's arguably this third one down, as Steve suggests, is very common. You throw some nodes on and you want to quickly wire them all up in quick succession. Now, with the keyboard, with the mouse, if you press Control or Command when you click on this port, when you click on the port, you can just click on the node, and as long as you keep holding Control down, the wire, you're in speed wire mode, we call it, or quick. I don't know what we call it, but you're in a mode where my hand is not on the mouse. Then you just click on the node and it wires it. But the key thing was, you can just click on each node in turn to add the wires. To answer your question, the core requirement is what we've done, which is having a keyboard shortcut to wire 2 nodes together. What I'm doing now is going beyond the actual core of the requirement and just exploring a bit, just seeing, is there something more that can be done to make it more intuitive now? We already have the speed wire mode that you don't have to drag the wire. You can just click on the port, then you click anywhere on the node and each node, and it wires them up, and which is super handy for doing speed wiring. But if you were to select all the nodes and then invoke the action just to wire them all up automatically, that would be neat. And like I said, these are 2 different scenarios, and although this is going to be the most common, where you quickly string some nodes together and you want to wire them all together, I think there's also cases, this is a common one, where, I'd say common, it's all relative, but say you've got a switch node and you have 10 cases, so you add 10 outputs to your switch node, and then you want to quickly wire each of those outputs to a corresponding adjacent flow. I think there is value to be had in exploring ideas here. Being able to wire, I guess, it's trying to work out. Here we have two cases, both have 3 nodes, but they're different. Here we would want the output of this one wired to each of these inputs. Here, we wouldn't want to apply that logic because you'd then end up with a wire to the function and a wire from the inject to debug. What you want is, well, the obviously inject function and then function to message.payload. So the question is, can we do this purely on the position of the nodes to glean what the right wiring ought to be? So yeah, if you have this scenario, we could do it purely on the X axis. On this scenario, we could do it based on the fact we can tell these 2 nodes on the x-axis that they overlap on the x-axis, at which point we'll wire them both to the same input. But then you get into this sort of scenario of, okay, I've arranged my nodes like this. Can we devise some rules that does the right thing in this scenario? So I'm not necessarily arguing so Steve says, selection order. So, yeah, we could base it purely on selection order and just wire each pair through the selection in the order they were selected. And that probably makes most sense. That's entirely sensible. And, why don't we start with that? So, we can change some of this logic now. So we're going to, as long as we've got more than one node selected, then how are we going to do this? We're going to set, we're going to iterate a bit. So we are going to work our way down this list, looking at node I and I plus 1. Then, it's all the same logic as we had before. Create the new link, we then add it. What is going to be different, though, is we don't want to do the history event, and we don't want to do the redraw for each one. We're going to do it down here. What we're going to add up here is a new links array. And then that will do that. So basically this is going to iterate over each pair in the list. Add a wire if it can between output 0 and input 0. It will skip over any pairs which don't have an output and input. And then once it's added all of them, any links it has added will be in this new links array. So we add that to the history event as a single entity. But we may as well say if new links.length is greater than 0, as in there's no point adding a history event if we haven't actually added anything. So how does that look? Let's reload. So I tell you, this group, group stuff could be a liability. So I select those 3 nodes, I invoke the function, and it's not worked. No. Oops. Task manager. Let's find the tab that I've just killed in an infinite loop. Come on. Where are you? There you are. No. I think... yeah, 96%. So what went wrong? Well, I added this while loop and then forgot to add we forgot to increment I. So I just stuck the browser in an infinite loop. Let's try that again. Right, we select the nodes, we invoke it, and that's worked. Well, don't sound surprised. It has worked. It's wired those up as you'd expect. Control Z removes both those wires. If I, you know what, I'm going to ungroup. They're getting in the way of what we're trying to do right now. The groups. Because if I select those 3 and then select those 3 and then add these 2 nodes as well, and if I invoke it now, so it's wired that one, that one, that one, then I think I'm not printing out the node selection, so I can't confirm the order. I seem to remember I added that function before I added that one. So having done a lasso select, I think that was my problem. If I do a control select, so they're in a very deliberate order. If I invoke it, yeah. So the order of the nodes were this one, this one, this one, this one, and that one. As it's gone through the pairs, obviously it's realized it can't add a wire from this debug to this inject, but then it's moved on to the next pair, which is this inject to that function, and that's worked. So yeah, I guess there's a question of should it stop when it finds something it can't do, but yeah. So Steve suggests in the chat, when a node has more than one output, connect each output to the following nodes in the selection until no more outputs or no more nodes in the selection. Well, that is a valid way of approaching it. My hesitancy is whether, so let's say we've got something like this, and let's mix it up. Let's add in a change node just for fun. If I select those 4 nodes and then invoke it, in my mind, that's what I wanted to happen, because, and this is the tricky thing, as humans viewing this flow, that feels entirely the right thing to have happened. Now, if that node was there, and if I select them, and if I invoke the function, I would argue that isn't what intuitively you'd expect to happen because of the position of this debug node. It's crying out to have been wired to that output for it to have done that instead. So yeah, this is where it could get interesting, and where we could end up down a rabbit hole of trying to solve problems that don't exist. But I mean, it sure would be nice to be able to have that, and to be able to invoke this function, and for it to do the right thing and wire each of those outputs. So yeah, old Bobby Tables, you are on the money. It is, we can look at the XY position and try and infer what the right thing to do is. Steve, you're quite right. Another choice here is a different action. So have an action that does wires along in series, and if you wanted to do this, then it's a different action. Yeah. Yeah, I want to, yeah. My head tells me you're quite right. A separate action is the right answer. My heart wants to try and write the code to do the right thing intelligently. Yeah, let's do. Okay, so a downside, which is pure observation. It's not a value judgment. We aren't judgmental here. If you were to select these 5 nodes, well, you'd want action A to operate between these two and action B to operate between those, rather than having one action that does the right thing at each hop. Yeah. Maybe having having 2 actions does not preclude us from having a third super smart action in the future. Smart wire. Yeah. So, okay, so the action we've got is good and can support multiple selection, and it will always just try and wire up in series. So the action we're going to do now is it will wire the first node of your selection to everything else. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. But now we've got to come up with a name. Add wire between. What do we call it? Okay, come Steve. You suggest a second action. You can come up with a bloody name for it. Well, I know what you mean, Sharon, about is this a realistic case? That said, certainly I could find in the forum places where people have asked to be able to do this conveniently, because when you have a switch and you add lots of cases, people want to be able to, they add lots of debugs, then they want to be able to just quickly map the outputs to the following nodes. So it might not be hugely common, but it certainly is something that has it's one of those you might not use often, but when you need it, you are so glad it's there. Okay. So serial and parallel, yeah. Well, wiring all the outputs to one debug node is an entirely valid approach. You know how you often see those memes around the different axes of good, evil, chaotic, and I can't remember what's the other axis. But yeah, I'm sure you could come up with some funny Node-RED patterns that, lawful, good, chaotic, evil. Yes, lawful and chaotic, good and evil. And what are the different patterns of Node-RED usage that fall into the different quadrants of that? Anyway, add. I can't, yeah. I kind of want add wire, but I'm wondering. I'm just going to call it map node outputs. No, that doesn't work. Add wires magic. I'm not going to sit here, you watching me failing to come up with a name. So add wires magic. We're going to run with this until something better comes along. And don't worry, it won't be called this come the release. So I'm just going to copy and paste. It's got to be one to many or map outputs, multiple outputs. We could rubber duck the name for the next half an hour, but I'm just going with add wires magic for now. So what we want to do is selection. So we've got more than one thing selected. That still holds true. We are going to source node is selection.nodes.unshift. Again, if you're a regular viewer of the live stream, you will know I have a complete mental block on the array.pop takes off that end on array.unshift. No, shift. Yeah, shift. A complete mental block on which end the array functions operate. Anyway, source node. So we're going to grab the first element as the source node, and that never changes. We then loop over what's left. In fact, I don't want to modify the selection object. Not sure I'm allowed to modify the selection object. No, I can mutate selection.nodes without fear. Yes, view.selection. It's not passing back any internal state. It's passing back an object that is newly generated for that function call. So I could mutate it, but I'm gonna not. So source node is the first in the selection. Then we are going to iterate over the rest. In fact, yeah. Source node, target, I'm going to get rid of node A, node B. I'm going to call them source and target because it's far more explicit. Okay. Now, of course, if source node dot outputs is 0, we can bail out straight away. Right. So target node Then we're going to say, oh, node B on line 781. Have I missed one? Thank you. Oh, yeah. That was the line I was just about to edit and we were fine. So, target node inputs greater than 0, then add it, and each time we update. Okay, so this isn't quite what we want, but it's close. So let's just see what this is doing at the moment. If I select all those nodes, what did I call it? I really did call it Add Wires Magic, didn't I? Select them, Add Wires Magic. Ooh, error. Property undefined. Oh, I plus 1 doesn't want to be I plus 1, it wants to be I. Okay, and then we invoke magic. So it's added all the wires, but they're all coming out of port 0, which it shouldn't be surprising because source port is 0. Yeah, we can do what can we do? Is this dirty? Math.min source node.outputs. Is that nasty? So, oh yeah, I think that does it. So if I select all these nodes, and this time I'm going to add wire magic, add wires magic, yeah, and it's done it. And if we come up to this scenario where I don't have the right number of outputs. Oh, where's that wire? What's that wire doing? That wire is curiously in entirely the wrong place. Okay, so it's not worked. What I was trying to do here, other than be a smart aleck, was the source port should be whatever is smaller. The number of outputs, oh, yeah, outputs minus 1. 0 indexed, so yeah. Okay, so we select those nodes and we invoke some magic. So that works. If I add in a couple more nodes here, select them all. Yeah, so it's mapped each node to an output, and then once we've run out of outputs, we just keep adding them to the bottom one, which in some ways is as arbitrary as anything else we could do. I mean, well, we've got two choices. We either say, once you run out of outputs, stop adding wires, except that would leave you like that. Yeah, so, yeah, if you just have 2 nodes selected, then it does the right thing. What it will do here is not the right thing. So, this is the case where it's now, rather than treat, well, yeah, that's where it falls down. So whilst having 2 actions is fine, it still kind of feels it would be nice just to have a single action that can, based on the layout of the nodes, do the right thing. Even if you've got a slight misalignment of nodes, you'd still want it to try and do the right thing, wouldn't you? What's going on there? Why should be... Oh, right, yes. You can't select multiple wires. That's another quirk, which is what it is. Yeah, so, you know, aside from not having a name, we've now got two actions that do the right thing. I mean, that's a good example there, where I select those three and I invoke the magic one, and it's filled in the missing wire. Yeah. Yeah. Do we want to try and do something smart? I'm just trying to think through... Okay, it's 9:10. I'm not going to pursue writing the code, but I'm just going to talk through if we were going to implement a single function that does the right thing in all these different cases, what would it do? So, given a selection, you know what, let's... Oh no, that's evil. See, this is my problem. I always, even before I start doing the basic case, I always then push it one step too far. And yeah, this is getting into the territory of the auto layout code that I've played with in the past, and you soon get so bogged down in edge cases that but in this scenario, with this selection, assume they've been selected in assume the starting node is the first node selected. We then sort the rest of the selection based on their X position. Which breaks as soon as you want to be able to loop back on yourself. So yeah, we don't want to sort. If we rely on the user selecting them in the right order, then we have the start node. We then look at the next node in the selection, and we look at the next two nodes in the selection. If those two nodes have similar X, then we consider them a group. And we look at the next node and see if that needs to be added to the group based on its X position. Until we... so if we were at this point, we would look at this node, and its next node is this one, and they overlap, so they would be considered a group. You would then look at the next node over here, and it's doesn't meet the criteria, so it's a future group. We don't worry about that for this iteration. And then we map the outputs of this one. We do the algorithm we've just done, which is the magic linking, but just between these two. And yeah, that would work for this case where you have yeah. And the reason this one suddenly gets pathological is, I would argue, what you want it to end up looking like is that. But based on the algorithm we've just described here, we'd see these two nodes as overlapping. They're like in a column, or sufficiently overlapping in a column. So this node wires to both of them. We then decide, okay, who does this wire to? And we look at the next nodes, and it's these two. Well, they're in a column. So the algorithm I've just described would end up doing that, which would be valid, but that is probably what's more expected. Now, how far down the rabbit hole of edge cases that we shouldn't need to care about are we? But this is, it's interesting. It is interesting about, because what the algorithm could do is, once it's got a group like this, these two, then almost partition the workspace. And when this one is looking at successors, only look at nodes that are in its partition. Only look at nodes in its partition. So this one would, come on, that would wire to that one, that would wire to that one. And then deal with the scenario where you want them to rejoin. There's some clever logic that I'd love to sit down and write, but I'm not going to because it's 9:15. But you can sort of see how you could get run away with this. Bob Tables, you make a good point. A lot of this is predicated on the user control clicking each node rather than just using the select box to select them all. And that's the tricky bit. That if you select, you need to know, we need to get the ordering. And if you infer the ordering purely on X position, then you're broken as soon as someone wants to do, to help organize their flows, they do something like that. Then, all bets are off now, because in this selection, that's horrid in terms of a layout, but if you wanted these two nodes to be wired to these two nodes and the user has selected all of that, well, everything we've just discussed would say this node would end up being wired to these two. Because if you think of it purely in these columns with a bit of overlap and a bit of grace, then that's what you end up with. But, as whoever said, Sean, it would be, I'm sure, with enough data, you could build a machine learning pattern matching that, given that set of nodes, it would know the desired wiring was that. So, it is just pattern matching and doing boring ML stuff that you'd be able to sell for thousands of dollars. If you had the source data to create your the training data to build the ML from. Anyway, we're not doing that tonight. I think what we've got is good. So we've got the two algorithms. There's the two actions, I should say. There is add wire between selected nodes and add wires magic. I think before this is a pull request, this is 2.2, so we don't need to throw a pull request in tonight. I do want to have a little more think on the naming, and again whether there is scope to have just a single action that does the right thing in more cases. I don't know. But yeah, definitely need to have a better name. So yeah, do ping on Slack if you have any thoughts on this, on naming or anything else you've seen. But I think I'm going to wrap up at this point. Yeah, going to wrap this one up. Not doing a pull request now, obviously. We need to get the naming right, but hopefully that was interesting. In other parish notices, we'll have 2.1.4 tomorrow, hopefully, maybe Wednesday, just mopping up a few little bits and pieces. We also need, I know Dave's been waiting for it so he can get the Raspberry Pi build updated for Raspbian now that they've released Bullseye, and get some fixes into that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Next Monday, what date is it next Monday? 29th. Yeah, I think next Monday I'll be live streaming. It's coming up to holiday, but coming up to it. It's holiday period's a month away, but got a few bits and pieces on Mondays that may get in the way of live streams, but I will as ever endeavour to keep you all posted on Twitter, or certainly the Twitch schedule if I'm having to change up the schedule at all. But there we go. Thanks everyone for joining the chat. It's always great having a lively chat because, you know, if it's me just talking to the void, then we only get so far. But having you guys there, keeping me honest, spotting my mistakes, making those suggestions really does help, and very, very much appreciated. So thanks for joining. Do leave a comment if you're on the YouTube archive. Do like and subscribe and all that jazz. Great to see you all, and I will be back, all being well, next Monday. So with that, I'll bid you all good night.